I'm going to start this video off with the question, and I want you to really think about your answer because it can really affect how you take what we talk about throughout the rest of the video. So the question is about, when it comes to investing, are you trying to build wealth or are you trying to add a second job? And what does passive income really look like to you? Because building wealth versus having a second job are two very different things. And what I see from a lot of people in the residential real estate space right now, or people who are looking to get into the residential space, is that they never really answered that question. And it shows when it comes to some of the things that come up once you get into that process. So I am not here to say that residential real estate is a bad investment. I've had lots of clients who have gone this route and done very, very well in it. I even own residential real estate property, so that is absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm also not saying that commercial real estate is the answer to all your problems, right? Or that is the best route for you. What I am going to do though is give you a comparison of the two that's real and honest and based on facts, and then you can decide based on the resources that you have, the capital that you have available, and the time that you have available, which one is really going to work best for you. So we'll start off with what residential and commercial have in common. They are fundamentally very similar, and so there really is a lot of overlap between them. And then second, we're going to talk about where they start to differ when it comes to things like capital that you need, the management structure, and then also the lease structure, because that can be super important and is a big, big differentiator. And then third, we're going to talk about that burnout conversation. This is something that I really don't think that people talk about enough, because one of them comes with a lot more burnout than the other, and that can lead you down a path that you didn't expect to be on. And then lastly, we'll really put all of them together and create a decision framework that will help you to decide which route is going to be best for you based on where you are as far as your resources. So let's go. So starting off with things that they have in common, number one is going to be their rental income. It's the same concept, right? You own a property, whether it's a house or a building, somebody rents space from you and they pay you for it every month. Simple concept. That's the rental income part of it. But also they both have that equity bill piece as well. So that rent that you are collecting will go towards paying down your mortgage. And as your principal goes down, your equity starts to go up on that. There's also appreciation. Generally, buildings appreciate over time. And so that's something that you can bank on no matter what scenario you find yourself in. Next is going to be depreciation. And so both assets will depreciate, although they do depreciate at different rates. Residential is at 27.5 years, and then commercial is at 39 years. But either way, they are both tax write-offs that can help you when it comes to offsetting some of the income that you receive. And then also long-term wealth. If you do this correctly, either vehicle can be a way to build long-term wealth, especially if you are planning to stay in it for a while. And so if you're watching this and you're like, oh my God, I've been doing residential, and she's about to say that I've been doing it all wrong this whole time, that is not what is about to happen here. If anything, if you do decide to switch over to commercial real estate based on what we talk about today, look at it more of a level up as opposed to, oh, I've been doing it wrong. So now let's get into where they are different. And I'm going to be very specific here because where you are in your journey is going to matter a lot. And you'll see why as we continue to go on. But so the first one is going to be your capital, right? How much capital is required for you to be able to purchase a property? So on the residential side, if you put, say, 10 to 20% down on an investment property, say it's between $300,000 to $400,000 for a single family home, then you need about 30 to 80K to be able to pay that down payment and purchase that property. Versus on the commercial side, you typically see prices on the low end around $1 million. And so those lenders are requiring about 25 to 30% down on those. So that puts your down payment at about $250K at a minimum. And so $30K versus $250,000 is a big differentiator and can really make the decision for you. Another way they are different is going to be the management responsibility. As a residential property owner, if you have tenants in there, you're going to be responsible for all the maintenance, all the repairs, all those things fall on you. They call you when something is broken or something needs to be addressed. And then on the commercial side, especially in those triple net leases, the tenant is going to be responsible for their own repairs. So HVAC goes out, the tenant is covering that. The plumbing needs to be looked at, the tenant is covering that. They also cover their portion of the taxes and the insurance for the property. So that's a very big difference in who's responsible for what when it comes to the owner's standpoint. When it comes to the length of the leases, they can also be very different. So on the residential side, you usually see a 12-month or a 1-year lease. Sometimes you see 24 months depending on the landlord, but most of the time it's going to be that 12-month lease. Versus on the commercial side, at a minimum, you should expect at least a 3-year lease term on a lease agreement. And that can also go up from there. So you can have 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And that really allows a lot of predictability as far as having stable, consistent income because those tenants are going to be there for so long. And then another thing you usually see in the lease is the escalations built in. So you aren't still paying the same rent amount at year 15 that you were at year 1 necessarily. They've already built in the escalations and say how much more you will pay per year going forward for the entire lease term. And then when it comes to the tenant profile, you're dealing with individuals or families on the residential side versus companies on the commercial side. And those companies often have backing that comes along with that. They have strong financials and credit, and they also have a vested interest in making sure that the property is maintained to a certain level because that affects how much money they're able to make, and that affects whether or not they're able to pay you the rent. We talked about this as one of the similarities as well, but when it comes to depreciation, we have the residential at the 27.5 years, and we have commercial at 39 years. But where it starts to really differentiate is when it comes to the value of the property. And so since commercial properties are generally more expensive or valued higher, then that benefit becomes greater on the commercial side. The biggest differentiator here, and I want to be super, super clear and straight up about what it is going to be the capital that you need to get started. Residential allows for you to get in for a lot less, and that is a plus here. That is not a negative. Being able to get in the game and doing something as opposed to sitting around and waiting to build the capital needed for commercial is not really the way to go, right? So commercial maybe is something that happens a little bit further down the line, and what really helps you to determine that based on where you are right now is how much capital that you have available. Now let's talk about the B word for burnout. So what I see from a lot of residential property owners is that they got into it for all the right reasons, right? For cash flow, to build wealth, and then somewhere around the second call about the AC and the third vacancy or turnover that they have to go through is where things start to get a little bit muddy and they forget why they got into it in the first place. Managing residential property is work. It is not always occasional work. Sometimes it is consistent work. And of course, the scale and the level at which you do this can be different, right? So if you have one property, maybe you aren't encountering as much as somebody who owns 10 properties, but things happen. People move, things break, and so those things need to be addressed, and they tend to fall on you as the owner, which leaves you with typically being burned out. And so all is not lost in this, though. Even if you do start to feel burned out, there are property management companies that you can hire to handle a lot of that day-to-day that comes along with being a residential property owner, and that's going to be super important as you continue to purchase more properties and scale, and even more so if this is not your full-time, right? So if you have another full-time job, having a property management company can be super, super helpful in taking some of that load off of you. But one thing that you have to be certain about is that the amount that you're paying for that is not eating too much into your margins. So if your margins are already tight, you're not really cash flowing a lot on the property, adding in a property management company can just make that even tighter. So let's do a quick example on that too. So let's say the rent that you're bringing in is $2,200 a month on your property. And so if we expect property management companies to be charging anywhere between 8% to 12% per month. And so that would be $176 on the low end and then $264 on the high end. And that's per month and also per property. And none of this is a reason not to invest in residential real estate. You just really have to go into it with your eyes wide open, with your goals in mind, and also keeping in mind what it really means for you to have passive income. Now, commercial real estate, especially those triple net leases, on the other hand, are designed to put a lot of that responsibility back in the hands of the tenant. So remember, they are paying not only their base rent, they're also paying their portion of the property taxes, of the insurance, and the common area maintenance. And so while you still hold some responsibility there, right, because you ultimately own the property, a lot of that goes back to the tenant, which requires a lot less of you. Which brings me back to my original question at the beginning of the video, which is, are you trying to build wealth or are you building a second job? And so with residential, it really could go either way depending on how you structure it, but commercial is literally set up to be building wealth and not creating that second job. Now let's get into that capital framework that we talked about. And this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. It's very much going to depend on where you are, what your bandwidth is, and what your ultimate goals are. But so starting off at the under $150,000, this is very much going to be a building stage, right? And so at this stage, what would make sense is to invest in residential property. And so maybe that's a few doors that you're able to get with that type of an investment, and you're able to build equity, create cash flow, and really start to compound and see some of the benefits of a residential investment property. And then when the time is right, once your capital has increased, you can consider switching over to a commercial property. And now that $150,000 to $250,000 is going to be more of a transitional zone, right? You really could go either way. A smaller commercial building might work for you depending on the price point, or it might be that residential is still where you need to stay, but you're now starting to get more comfortable with the conversation and the idea around transitioning over to commercial property. Now, once you get into that $250,000 or more category, now we're really ready to have the conversation about whether or not commercial could be a viable option for you, right? Because that's going to put you at a point where you can now afford a down payment on a property that's about $1 million or so. And so now we're switching from this kind of a someday kind of thing to now let's run some numbers and see what the real options are. And please keep in mind that none of these are hard cutoffs, right? So your individual situation, as far as your income, your credit profile, any equity that you have, all of that is going to go into whether or not you are prepared to buy residential or commercial property. But this just gives you some perspective on kind of where you might be based on how much capital that you have. And please don't leave here feeling like residential real estate is some kind of a consolation prize or second place or something like that. You are still very much building cash flow, building equity, and getting your mindset into dealing with tenants and just being a part of the real estate space from a landlord perspective. So all of that is going to come in handy if and when you do decide to transition over to commercial real estate. Everything we do here is backed by numbers. This is nothing new for us here. But so we're going to go through 3 different scenarios. We'll use that same $300,000 that we used in our other video. The first scenario is going to be putting $300,000 down on a single family property. The second scenario will be putting $300,000 down across several residential properties. And then the third scenario is going to be $300,000 down on a $1.2 million commercial property. So same $300,000. We'll just see how it looks differently depending on what you choose to do. And I'll actually put it into a kind of chart and make it as simple as possible and easy to understand for you guys. A couple things I want to point out about this comparison. First is going to be the 4 residential properties and the 1 commercial property actually have similar values when it comes to the equity and the appreciation. But where they are different is going to be that management piece, right? So for the residential side, that 4 properties means 4 potential repairs that need to be done, 4 tenants that need to be managed, 4 move-ins and move-outs that needs to happen. And so that's a big difference between that 1 commercial property there. The second thing to note is going to be centered around cash flow. So for the residential properties at the current rates and the price points that we went with, these numbers are showing that it is barely even breaking even in year 1 versus the commercial property with a 7% cap rate is showing between $500 to $800 coming in every month. So that's a big difference there. The third thing is that residential path is going to require you to be actually in the business. And that's even with the property management company. That's 4 doors, 4 leases, 4 everything to go along with that. Versus that commercial property with the triple net lease is going to allow the tenants to really be in the business and not you. And if $300,000 isn't available to you, this is all still very useful information, right? Because it shows you what could be and how you can use residential real estate to maybe be the down payment that takes you over to the commercial side. So it's still just a part of your journey. Now let's go back to the question that I started this video out with. Are you building wealth or are you creating a second job? And the truth is that both options, residential and commercial real estate, can really fall on either side of that. But what we usually see is that residential is going to lean more towards that second job option, especially if you find yourself in a situation where you aren't able to have a property manager and you have multiple doors that you are dealing with. So here's what I think. If you find yourself in that building stage where you have $150,000 or less, then residential is probably going to be the right move for you right now, right? Start there, do your due diligence there, make sure you're intentional about what you're doing, and then when the time is right, maybe you will transition over to commercial real estate. Now, if you're in a situation where you are approaching $250,000 or more, then now it's time to have a real honest conversation about commercial real estate and what that could look like for you. So that means it's time for you to book a one-on-one call with me. In that call, we'll go over exactly what your goals are, what you're trying to accomplish, what your finances look like, and then we'll put together some numbers and see what could actually work for you. So there's a link in the description to be able to do that. My name is Lexi Sims. I'm a commercial real estate advisor here in Houston, Texas. I'll see you guys in the next video.